So in this installment, we are going to add the ability to take items from the game world and add them to our backpack. So this is an action. Taking is an action. The same way that north, east, south, and west are actions that we can do, we're going to now add in a new action, and this will be take. So with that, we've added in a new action. Now, we already are processing our actions inside our game loop right here. Just going to delete that. As long as I'm working in here, I might as well kind of clean up code a little bit as we go through. So we can see west, north, east, south are actions. But now we want to add in another action. So to do that, I can just simply say else if, I'm just going to, got to type correctly, else if, parentheses, curly brace, return, like that. Now we have to specify what it is. So if action is equal to take, so writing in a take action, now we need to figure out what that entails. So if we're going to be taking something, how do we do that? What do we want to do? Well, the logic for taking items, dropping items, and using items is going to be a little bit more than just simply checking for a map location and updating game message. So what would make more sense is to create a function to do that, and we will pass to that function the item that we are using. So we have to realize, wait, item, we're not cycling through the items yet in our game, but we need to figure out what item that they ask for under game input, if any. So it's now once more a for loop. So we'll just populate that. We can go I, and this will be our game items. And I forgot there is an additional, when we're processing items here, these are the items that exist currently in the world that may or may not always exist. But what we need to do is have a master list of items, because at some point we're going to have items that we are holding and items that we know about. So we need a master list of all the items. So these are the items in play. And this comes in, it says we're adding and dropping and moving from our backpack and to the ground. In the beginning here, they're going to be the same. Over time, it varies. So we'll say game items. And this is going to be our master list of items. So game items is going to be equal to, and in this case, it is indeed going to start out as the same. This would be all items, because if we started out with some items in our backpack, they wouldn't be part of the items array, but we would still want to know about them so that we could work with it. So we need to be able to know what a game item is, because the items array are the items that are on the ground. That we are working with, because we treat the items on the ground differently than what's in our backpack, because it has to be in our backpack for us to be able to use it, and it's on the ground when we do our loop to say, hey, we see this here. So this is why we need to know about all the possible items in the world versus the items that are on the ground. So I'm just adding a comment here. All possible items in the game world. So forgot about that little part when we started looking down here and we're working with our little for loop. So this now is going to be, we're going to go through all game items, because these would be all things that I could ask about, because what we are going to do is much like what we've done before. If game input dot index of, and this instead of actions is going to be game items. So if we're able to find that, or if we're able to find that, which is then if, as long as that index is not equal to -1, because remember it returns -1 if it doesn't find something. So if we ask for something that's not in the game world, possible list of items, then it's going to fail on that. Now, what I also want to do is say let item, and I have to put this here. I can't just say let item equal game items right here, because remember here, this was all items plural. These are our list of items. Now I want to know a specific item, the item that the person was asking about. But if I say let item equals item here, if I define a variable inside curly braces, it only lives inside those curly braces. So if I ask about that element out here, it wouldn't know. So if here then I said item, and this one here didn't exist, come on. So if that didn't exist, then I asked about item down here, it wouldn't know what it is because I defined it inside these curly braces. So curly braces are like a boundary. They trap the knowledge of a particular variable. So by defining something here, it only technically is going to live in these curly braces unless I pass it on, which is what we're going to do. If I define variables here, which is at the root or base level of my whole program, because notice we're not inside, we're just in the script tag, not inside variables. That's why anything defined out here, everything else has access to it. This is referred to as scope. So scope of variables is something that at times will be maddening or frustrating because you think you defined something in the right place and your code can't find it, or you define something at too high a level and then it interferes with things and other places that you don't intend it to. So you always want to try and keep your scope as tight as you can, because that is going to make it much better for you while you are working. So this is why we define it here. So now item is just defined there. Let's uncomment that. So final version, item is defined here the same way action is defined up here because we used it with our actions. So we're doing the same kind of thing. We're repeating that. We're checking the game input for a particular item. So we will look for an action, and then we will look for an item, and then we'll store those. And we're not using that there. But if we do find an item, we only want to find one item at a time. So if we find an item, and whatever response the game input was from the player, then we want to exit out of this. We don't want to keep going through the rest of our game items array. All right, so once we find an item, then we can pass that item to our take item function, which hasn't been made yet. So no time like the present. Then we'll just say function take item, and now with this, when we're defining it, we can just say, since we've passed it in, we called it item, we'll just call it item here. So we can see it turned orange because it's showing up as a function parameter. I mean, I could just easily call this Fred, but it'd be a little bit confusing looking through the rest of the code. Then when we say something about Fred, you're like, who's Fred? I don't know what this Fred is, but we're talking about items, so it makes more sense to use that there. And now we need to grab the index of that item, which I guess we could have stored that and passed that in as well, but it's just as easy to do it here. So I'm going to say item index. The index is its position in the array, 0, 1, 2, because currently we only have 3 items in it. But if we had more items, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it would work out to be. So it's in our items array, and then index of that item. So if we're using an item, then we are going to pass that in. Oh, like why is it red? I forgot my equal sign. That would be why. Now, remembering that we have kind of our 2 item listings here. We have our main game items, which just means we can try and use an object that exists, and then items array is the items that are currently on the ground. That's why we are able to take them, because if an item's in our backpack, we can't take it because we already have it. And that's what we will be then solving here in just a moment, where we will say if item index here is not equal to -1, meaning we found that item in the, because if we if we had the box of matches in our backpack, but then we said take box of matches, and it's like, okay, that's a valid item, we'll pass that in, but now the item index doesn't exist because it's in our backpack, it's not on the ground. So that's why we say if it has an index, it's not -1. -1 meaning it's not there. And the item locations index. So we need to verify that it is indeed, because we don't want the player just saying, hey, take an item, and if that item's in the game world on the ground, we could take it. But we only want to be able to take an item when it's in front of us. We shouldn't be able to stand over in square 8 and take an item from square 1. That doesn't make sense. So we have to verify that the map location, which is the square we're currently in, matches the item index number, or the item location's value of where this object currently resides in the game world. So if that's the case, then we'll say game message is going to be equal to, got a little hashtag, you pick up the $, curly brace, close curly, period, and tick mark here. So we closed it with our little tick. And now we're going to pick up that item. So that picked up the item. Well, that's technically it didn't pick it up. It just updated game message. But we now want to put that item in our backpack. To put it in our backpack, backpack.push. Going back to our very first kind of messing around with arrays, where we pushed something into the array. So it now adds it to our array. Then what we're going to need to do is to remove the item from the items, which, I mean, I guess technically it could be called items on ground, would be a more complete name for it. And then you could do that. But now that we've started down this road, I really don't want to go and update that. But I'm just going to go here and say else game message is going to be equal to, you cannot do that. So if we ask to do something, so if we try to pick up an item and that item is not at this location, or that item is not on the ground anywhere, then it will give us a message of you cannot do that. Now you could change the message to be something different. You could even have different messages based on location, based on, I mean, there's lots of flexibility if you want to add in more items with that. So this starts it, but we still need to then remove the item from the items on ground array. So after we put it into our backpack, then we say items splice. Again, going back to our early array exercises just with the backpack. And then we will splice at item index and we'll remove that single object. And if we're removing an object from the items on ground array, then we also need to remove it from, items locations, not item locations versus items locations. A little typo there on my part. Splice, and this will be item index. And again, we remove one element. So let's save that. Go over here, and if I go west, hey, I see a knife. Take, you cannot do that. Take knives. You cannot do that. Take knife. You pick up a knife. My backpack now contains a knife. Now if I go east, go back west, the knife is no longer there because that knife is in my backpack. Now what we need to do is mirror what we've done with take item and drop an item. So we can add items from our backpack back into the items on ground array, and effectively putting them back into the world so that they can be taken again.